y'all, welcome back. My name is Christina and I love The Baby Whisperer. This is her book that we are currently going through in this series of videos. Today we will be looking at chapter 2, which is about your baby's emotional life from birth to 1 year old. So if you haven't heard of The Baby Whisperer, her name is Tracy Hogg. Right here, this is her book that I love. It really helped me with my daughter when she was 11 weeks old is when I originally found this book, and it's helped me ever since. Now she's 14 months. So I don't want to dive in too deep to this chapter because you should just read it on your own, but we'll just be going through a overview of everything that she talks about. Essentially, she breaks your baby's emotional life into 3 stages that correlate with your baby's age. So there's 4 months and under, there's 4 to 8 months, and then there's 8 months to a year. And after a year, your baby's emotions tend to become more complex. You start seeing tantrums and things like that. And so she's dedicated a whole other chapter later in her book to beyond 1 year. So eventually we will be doing that video, and once it's done I will link it here so that you can easily access it. So starting with 0 to 4 months, essentially your baby is just developing expression. So as you see them grow, you might even notice at the beginning of their life that their emotions seem to be kind of spontaneous and that they can't necessarily control the way that they react with their face, but they are reacting to things that they feel. So if they're feeling gas and discomfort, they're looking uncomfortable in the face. And eventually, once they start to see you and make eye contact with you and recognize you, they will smile, and you get to experience that joyfulness coming from their face. I can hear my daughter in the background. She's trying to go down for her nap, but she was a little too wound up, so she might make some sounds during this video. So before your baby turns 4 months, their limbic system in their brain hasn't fully turned on yet. So they are feeling those emotions and they're reacting to them on their face, but they're not necessarily internalizing them, and they're not going to necessarily remember them either, which is a really good sign if you have a baby who cries a lot, who might have some gastric distress. And basically it's a comfort to know that they're not going to remember that pain. It's not going to stay with them for a while. And crying is basically their only form of communication at that age. So no matter what they might be feeling, they will probably cry, and that's when it comes to us to try to figure out what each cry means. They are, through those cries, expressing their emotions. So whether they're hungry, bored, tired, they're in discomfort or pain, they usually are eliciting a different type of cry. So once you get familiar with your baby's cries, you're able to tell the difference between them, and that's because of the difference of emotion with each cry. If they weren't feeling any emotion at all, then every cry would be the same and we would be so clueless as to what they might want. And even when they do begin to smile and imitate you a little bit, it's a sign of their awareness of emotions and that they're tuning into your emotions. So it happens so early on, before 4 months. This all comes together and they actually are developing this awareness of how they feel and how others feel, which I think is pretty advanced for what most people assume their baby feels at 4 months. But I think it's quite amazing that they progress so quickly. Next we have the 4 to 8 month portion. So this is when the upper limbic system in their brain really kicks in and they do start to express and feel and internalize their emotions. They also start to recognize faces and places. They start to become more aware of their environment, and they start to interact more with people that they see on a daily basis and with people that they don't actually know. Around 4 months as well is when you can begin sleep training, because babies are able to actually self-soothe at this age. And self-soothing it does have to do with soothing your emotions, but it is a learned trait. So it's not something that your baby will just develop. They do have to be taught how to self-soothe. You'll also find that they might even be easier to soothe and calm down, even when they don't necessarily have their feelings under control. They just might be able to calm themselves down quickly, especially if they are in the comfort of a caretaker or a person that they are very familiar with. They also will start to develop preferences during this window, especially when you start solids, whenever that might be, maybe around 6 months. You'll start to notice that your baby likes certain foods, or they might actually prefer breastfeeding or bottle feeding, and they will actually communicate those preferences. So during that window is when they start to not necessarily cry because of basic instinctual feelings, but they might cry because they wanted something else or wanted to go somewhere else or be with someone else. That is about the time where you can kind of start to see their personality come out a little more, because you'll know their preferences. You'll know who they like to play with, who they like to spend their time with. This is actually around the time for my daughter that we could tell she started really liking her dad more. Not that she didn't like him before, but she actually really enjoyed spending time with him, and it wasn't just about me because I was the one feeding her all the time. And then lastly, we have the 8-month to 1 year chunk. And I think this is the portion of the first year that people misunderstand the most. As we saw, at 4 months, your baby was tuning into your emotions and they were developing their own, and it really matured over the 4 to 8 month portion, but it really matures at 8 months to a year. And a lot of parents, especially new parents, don't actually anticipate how big that change is. So at 8 months to a year, their feelings can actually overwhelm them, and they feel more than what they can communicate because they're not verbal yet. They're not talking. They might start pointing, they might start gesturing to things. They're finding ways to communicate, but it can be really frustrating when you don't have the words to say what you want. So if you're just trying to express that you're hungry, but you don't have the words, then you're hungry and frustrated. And so their emotions can overwhelm them very easily. They also have a deeper connection with their caregivers, and around 8 months is when separation anxiety can develop. Some babies get it a little earlier, some babies can get it a little later. There's not an exact time frame window for separation anxiety, but you might actually start to notice it at this point, that they're not comfortable being away from their parents and they prefer their parents' company above everybody else's. You might also notice stranger anxiety increase as well. And it's at this time that they have to be taught how to handle their frustration and their emotions, how to be taught not to whine when they want something. And this is the part I think is most misunderstood, because people assume that those are things you'll teach your child when they're older, maybe when they're a toddler and they're in a tantrum phase, then you teach them how to get everything under control. But the point is to start as soon as possible and to start teaching them like how to handle their emotional, especially when they're around other people. If your child is playing with another child of a similar age, you might have to intervene. They might get frustrated if the child takes something away from them, and they might try to hit, and you have to physically teach them, we don't hit, we're gentle with people. This is also when I noticed that my daughter could get a reaction out of me if she like hit my face, and instead of reacting in a funny way, I had to teach her like we don't hit people in the face, mostly because she's so strong she doesn't realize it. But a lot of parents might just assume that's kind of a phase or just a funny thing that their child might do, or it's like, oh ha, she thinks she's like slapping me in the face. But that behavior will just continue to develop. So you want to teach your children as early on as possible, around this age, around 8 months, that hitting is not okay, that they can actually hurt other people, and that they need to express their emotions through their words eventually once they have them. So it's up to us as parents to be actively looking to stop tantrums. You might start to notice tantrums around 1 year. I think it's closer to 1 year. You probably won't see so many tantrums at 8 or 9 months, but you definitely will start to see them as your child becomes more mobile and interacts with more babies their age. They will clearly be reacting in their bodies and having emotions that they don't know how to control. And this is when they really need our help. And that will pay off eventually when we talk about the future chapter of what happens in your child's emotional life after they're 1. This is just setting the groundwork for that. And I'm sure we've all heard of the terrible twos, and you're not going to completely avoid the terrible twos by doing this and by starting early and teaching your child these healthy habits, but you're going to lay a foundation for what your child can expect when they are having runaway emotions or tantrums that seem uncontrollable. Then Tracy Hogg in her book gets into baby temperaments, and I think this part can be fun for a lot of parents. She breaks down babies into 5 general temperaments, and what she says is your child is not going to exactly fit any of these, but you should see some way that they might lean or that they might actually relate to in most situations. So we have the angel temperament, textbook, grumpy, spirited, and touchy temperaments. And I think a lot of parents, when they read this, can kind of relate their child to a temperament. But I also created a quiz that you can take if you're having a difficult time pinning down what your child is. You can just take it. It's down below in the description. It's just a Google Doc. It's really simple. You'll just have to take notes off to the side about your answers. But hopefully that can help provide you insight if you are struggling to understand what your baby's temperament is. So when it comes to temperament, it's really a matter of nature over nurture. Your baby is going to be born being a certain temperament. Tracy Hogg even said that sometimes in the delivery room when a baby was born, she could just tell by their cry what type of temperament they were going to have, and she was right. But there's also this aspect of nurture where we as parents can override temperament. And I think override is kind of a strong term, but we can help guide the temperaments of our children to be more mature and refined. So if your child is spirited and they naturally want to be unruly and run wild, we can help refine them into a fearless, driven leader. And there's a lot of problematic behaviors that can arise from any temperament. If we observe our child's temperament, we can kind of predict the behaviors that they are going to have in certain situations. And if we are a patient and conscientious parent, then we can work with our child and teach them how they should properly react in a way that is appropriate. Another thing Tracy stresses in this chapter is that you should see the child that you have and not the child that you want, or the child that you wished that you might have had. So if you happen to have a more shy personality, you would probably do better with a touchy baby because you would relate to them more. But if your baby is really spirited and adventurous and outgoing, you might have a more difficult time reining them in. And you might even wish that they were less outgoing. And I think that's something a lot of parents might struggle with, especially as you have more children and they grow older and they're also different from each other. But it's important that we let go of the things that we wanted and we focus on what our child is actually like. Additionally, Tracy Hogg goes over her types of parents. She has 5 types. There's confident parents, by the book parents, high-strung parents, go-getter parents, and headstrong parents. And we want to be the most like the confident parents, the ones who are very confident in their own capabilities to care for their child and love their child, and who are confident in their child and in who they are. And there's not going to be a certain type that we might all fit, but you can see yourself kind of lean towards one side or the other in certain situations. So for example, a high-strung parent might take your baby's excessive crying personally, like they're crying to hurt you or to bother you. And I have felt that before. Not very frequently, so I wouldn't call myself high-strung in general, but I've certainly felt that emotion and caught myself in it, knowing that that was a negative way of thinking about my child's behavior. And I was able to just sit back, assess what she needed, and I was confident in the way that I was teaching her how to properly behave. So when it comes to actually building healthy emotional behavior in your infant and your baby under 1, it might not feel like there's a lot you can do, but the small amount that you can do is really quite simple and it goes a long way. So the biggest key to success is actually building a trust bond between you and your child. They need to trust you that you will be there and you will be consistent and patient and caring for them. And you need to trust that you have the right tools in order to help guide them to the right place. So I think we all have an image in our mind of how we want our child to behave. If we're out on a restaurant, we want them to sit and smile and be social, but to eat and to not throw a tantrum and to just be calm and maybe not wiggly. But our children might be wiggly, they might not be social, they might not be hungry, they might be picky about the environment or about the food. And so we just need to trust ourselves that we have the right tools to help correct those things and help give our child a good experience, but also give ourselves a good experience. And maybe even learn from that you shouldn't take your child out to restaurants very frequently, or that you should only go to restaurants that have a certain environment. And we don't want to negate our child's emotions. We want to help them understand their emotions. So instead of them having a tantrum and you ignoring them, that's a common tactic I think with older children, is like turn your back to them. I fully disagree with that personally. I just have memories of myself throwing a tantrum in a grocery store when I was young, and my mom would do that, and that just made me even more mad. I was probably like 6, so that was probably not good at all for that age, but I just remember that feeling. And so I don't want to do that with my child. I don't want her to have to scream harder to feel like she needs to get my attention. So instead, we have to do the hard thing, and we have to get on our child's level, and we need to calm them down, help them to soothe, and then explain to them what we saw happen. So we don't want to force emotions on our child, but we want to say things like, it seems like you might be frustrated because this happened. I think that you're feeling frustrated. And they don't have the words to respond and confirm or deny that, but it helps to give a sense of concreteness to their emotion. They're just experiencing this crazy emotion and they don't know what to do or how to handle it. And if you give it a name, then it makes it seem more real to them. You also don't want to abandon them to be on their own. So doing a timeout, putting them in their crib for a little bit when their emotions are just all over the place is not a great idea at this age. They need the guidance. They need us to take them by the hand and walk them through what they're feeling and what the appropriate response was. So if your child was throwing a tantrum and was frustrated over something, you should figure out what exactly triggered that, but you should also walk them through what they should have done appropriately, even if you don't think they'll fully understand. But you want to teach them to express their frustration with words so that when they finally have the words, they know exactly what to do. And I think at this point you can answer for them. You can say, do you think you were frustrated? I think you were frustrated. And you kind of are putting the answer in their mouth so that when they get to the age where they can express it, yes, I do think I was frustrated, Mom, then they have the words and they know the answer. Also, a big thing is you want to teach them how to play independently, and trust factors into this because your child wants to trust that you are there. When children have a hard time playing independently, they might just be experiencing separation anxiety. So if my daughter's just here in the living room playing by herself and I'm in the kitchen cooking, she needs to trust that I'm not just going to leave out through the door or that I haven't just gone into another room and disappeared. She needs to trust that I'm there, and that if she does get hurt or experiences an emotion that makes her cry, that I'm going to come and I'm going to be with her. But she's going to have a hard time playing here if she's not sure why I'm in the other room, if I'm going to come back. And I think that's just something that needs to be taught over time. So there's lots of things that can impact that trust of being able to play independently, but it is a skill depending on what caused that lack of trust in that area. The big thing that Tracy Hogg always talks about is a lack of trust that was given through sleep training when you leave them to cry it out alone. So that can create big emotions in your child. And if that sleep training you did and it was successful for you, it might not be as big as a problem. But if you did that sleep training, you attempted it, and then you gave up, and your child learned, oh, sometimes my mom comes back and sometimes my mom doesn't, then that can create a broken bond of trust that you will have to repair. So if you do feel like your child struggles in the area of playing independently, maybe even sleeping independently, doing things on their own, when of course it's age appropriate for them to do that, then you want to be that parent that tunes into your child. You want to investigate the cause, figure out what triggers them, and see if you can correct it slowly and with them, guiding them. I just want to go through a list of trust busters. So if you have noticed, or you might be curious if your child feels like there's been some sort of broken bond of trust, these are just some common ways that she's found that parents have broken that bond on accident. You can not honor or negate your child's feelings. like saying, oh no, you love dogs, stop crying when they're meeting a dog, forcing a baby or toddler to eat when they're full, cajoling them into changing their mind, not communicating with them. You should be trying to have a running dialogue with them, even when they can't talk yet, even if you're just copying the sounds that they make. That's so good for them. Introducing new situations without warning and then assuming that they'll be okay. So this is something I've learned, especially when we started taking our daughter to the church nursery. She started going when she was 8 months, and we would just hand her off and be like, bye. And we learned after like 2 or 3 tries that it really helped just to say to her, you're going to the nursery. We're walking to the nursery. We're in the nursery. Okay, we'll be back. Just saying things like that really helps. Even if, it just didn't feel like it would at the time, but it did. Another trust buster can be sneaking out of the house to avoid a scene. So if you're leaving for work or for a date with your husband or something, and you just go and they're like, where did you go? Where is she hiding somewhere? I didn't know that she was gonna leave. That can be really scary for your child. And then saying one thing and then doing another, so not being consistent in your word, can also bust some trust. So saying that they can't have one candy and then giving in and giving candy when your child cries over it can ruin their trust, because they're not actually sure that you're going to follow through with the things that you say. And it might seem in the moment like, oh, she'll like me more because I'm actually giving her candy even though I didn't want to. But it's really going to affect them later when they need to rely on the consistency and the character of your word as their parent. And I think that really goes for cases of discipline too. If you say you're going to discipline your child in one way and then you don't do it, then you're just teaching them that they can just do whatever they want. And then they just don't trust you to act as their parent, and they might not even respect you from that, which seems harsh, but it's true. So now looking at Tracy Hogg's 12 trust building tips for parents. Number 1 is tune in. So when your child is crying or maybe experiencing some emotions that they're not familiar with, just take a second and think, is this normal for my child? Do I know who she is? Is this well in her character for how she usually behaves? If you're having trouble describing to yourself your child's emotional core, then you might not be paying enough attention, and you should be just taking notes in your mind and looking for ways that your child consistently acts. But keep in mind too that your child needs to have emotional needs met during this time. And if you're struggling to understand their emotions, then you're probably also struggling to meet those emotional needs. So that's why it's so important that you have a more whole and rounded understanding of who your child is. Number 2, if you haven't already, you should put your child on the EASY plan. So that was what we talked about last video, EASY, easy. That is just that daily routine and rhythm that you will have with your child when you do eating, activity, sleep, and you time every single day over and over and over. And depending on your child's age, that will look a little different. Definitely a big difference from 3 months to 8 months. But that calm and structured routine is just so helpful for your child. Just having that predictability gives them this feeling of safety and comfort and security so that they know exactly what they should be expecting throughout their day. It also helps you as the parent not run them too much. If you do tend to find yourself wanting to run more errands or being out all the time, once you get your baby on a structured nap routine, you might find that that completely changes their temperament. Just having those naps throughout the day be more predictable might be more helpful for them. Number 3, talk with your baby. Don't just talk to her. So even though it just feels like you know your child's not really communicating yet, they're just doing simple sounds like ba, da, ma, you should be trying to have a conversation back. You can talk in her language. You could just, talk in English back. Just pretend like you know what she's saying. But lock eye contact with her, make that eye contact. Make sure that she knows you're paying attention to her and that you're talking to her or him. I'm sorry, I always say her. I just have a daughter. Even though it's going to take her months, maybe years to talk back, she knows that you're paying attention to her and that you want to connect. Then number 4, you should respect your baby's physical space. So even if you know he doesn't understand what you're doing, you can explain things to him. So if you're gonna change his diaper, tell him, say, I'm gonna change your diaper. And you should respect that that's your baby's body and that you respect who they are. So if you're gonna put on their coat, explain, it's cold outside, so we're gonna put our coat on. Don't just grab it and jam them into it and expect them to like that. But just a little warning before is just gonna be very helpful for them. That also can be a helpful tip of advice when it comes to going to the doctor's office. So knowing that the doctor's office is a very intrusive space to them, that things are being done to them, and just being a comfort to them, explaining to them, we're going to the doctor, this is what's going to happen, you might be getting vaccines, and just sticking by their side and just really honing in on the way that they might be reacting to everything. Number 5, never ignore your baby's cries. And you should start to try to label as well what those cries mean. So I spoke about that a little earlier in the video. But if you can put a name to the emotions that you think your baby is feeling, then you should try to help her understand them by naming them, but don't force it on her. Number 6, let your baby's emotions guide your actions. Don't just, when your baby starts crying, assume what needs to be done. You need to pick them up and do this. But wait for them. Maybe they'll reach out their arms to you. Maybe they'll want a little space, so they might put out their hand. They might try to push you away. Or maybe they're crying at something you might be doing. If you were trying to engage them in an activity that was new and they clearly didn't like it, don't force it on them. Let that be the way that they're communicating to you. If that's the way that they're telling you that they don't like the activity that you are doing. Number 7, figure out what methods calm your baby best. When your baby's young enough, swaddling can help. If they're older, they might like a certain stuffed animal or a lovey to help comfort them. Just figure out what your baby likes and reacts to. You just don't want to make the situation worse by trying to comfort them in a way that they don't actually like. Number 8, take steps to make sure your baby is eating well. I know we all get hangry when we haven't eaten. Our babies get hangry too when they haven't. So literally from the start of their life, obviously it's so important at the beginning to make sure that they're eating frequently, that they're eating enough, and you need to just continue that concern, especially as they go into solids. Don't be over concerned because you don't want to be forcing food on them if they're actually not hungry. But make sure that they are getting enough throughout the day. They might need a little snack in the afternoon or even in the morning. Just figure out what kind of food schedule they need in order to stay happy and in a good mood. But just also keep in mind that food can sometimes be used as a way to bribe children out of certain behavior. Number 9, keep to nap times and bedtimes. When we're sleep deprived, we also don't act as well as we do when we are well rested. So just be aware of your child's temperament and how desperately they need a nap. If you have an angel baby, they might do pretty well skipping a nap here and there, but a touchy or grumpy baby is not going to do well with that. So keep that in mind when you are having some sort of day that just might be a little hectic. If you just need to go off the book a little bit, just keep in mind the way your child will react to less or more sleep. Number 10, don't hover. Let your child explore and be independent. You do want to keep an eye on them, and you do want to be next to them, guiding them how to behave properly with other children, but you don't want them to feel like they're always going to do something wrong, that you always have to be there grabbing their hand, pulling them away, keeping them safe. That's just going to make them afraid to actually be on their own, and that will add to separation anxiety. 11, plan activities at the time of day when your baby is at their best. So this depends on your child's temperament and honestly just on their unique personality. My daughter is pretty good, honestly, at any time of day, but she definitely is better right after a nap than right before a nap. So I try to do things as soon as she wakes up. If we're going for an errand, I take her out right after the nap rather than before her next nap. You might just be aware of the fact that your child is actually a little better in the morning and gets more worn out in the afternoon, or vice versa. And then number 12, make sure that everybody who cares for your baby knows about their temperament and accepts it and understands who they are as a person. So if you have a caretaker, like a babysitter or a daycare worker, just explain to them, hey, my child is a little touchy and sensitive to these stimulants. So if you could just be aware that those things can trigger an emotional reaction, then that'll go a long way. I hope you all really liked and enjoyed this video of us going through chapter 2 of the Baby Whisperers book. If you did like it, please subscribe so you can be aware when new videos come out. Next, we will be tackling chapter 3, which is breastfeeding and bottle feeding in the first 6 months. So that will be more specific. This video was kind of hard because it's literally talking about a whole year of emotional changes of your child, and that is so much. So depending on where your child is at, you might want to review the book and look for certain spots that are helpful for you. Also remember, I do have a quiz in the description below if you want to find out your baby's emotional temperament and style. But yeah, please like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions about anything I said in the video, or if you just want advice for your own specific situation.